Welcome back, everyone. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you all for tuning in. This is episode number 15. In today's episode, we have to get into my recap for my picks from NFL week number 8. We also have a question of the week. And then, of course, we're going to finish the episode with my top 5 and worst 5 rankings after week 8. So let's get into it. All right, so first we got to get into my recap from NFL week number 8. Again, for those new to the show, each week before Sunday, I make a prediction about 5 games, 3 games that are a part of my pick 3, one as my lock of the week, and one as my underdog pick of the week. Now, this week's picks didn't go that well. I had been on a good streak. This week wasn't as great. Let's get into it. So to start, in terms of my pick 3, this particular week, I was 1-2 in my pick 3. For those that don't remember, I picked the Kansas City Chiefs, the Seattle Seahawks, and the New York Jets as the 3 teams that I expected to win. So again, I was 1-2 in these picks. For the season so far, that brings me to a record of 13-8. So still definitely a good amount above 500. Not exactly where I want to be, but it happens sometimes. So let's get into each game individually. So the first game in my pick 3 that I picked was the Kansas City Chiefs to beat the Las Vegas Raiders. The Chiefs did win the game 27-20. For those of you who are looking at the spread, they did not cover the spread. The spread in that game was 9.5 points. They only won by 7. Now, I did expect them to cover the spread, and for the most part, they really did. It was really what we call a backdoor cover. Vegas got a late touchdown when the Chiefs were pretty much in like a prevent type defense, and it was less than two minutes left. So yes, they did bring the score within 1 touchdown, but the game wasn't really that close. Even though in the very beginning of the game, the Raiders did get off to a good start and the score was close. For the most part of the game, you could tell that the Chiefs were dominating. It was just a matter of, how it would end. But ultimately, the Chiefs did what I expected them to do. They were able to run the ball effectively. They did get D-Hop involved into the mix. Patrick Mahomes, in his interview after the game, did admit after watching some of the tablets that he did miss DeAndre Hopkins on a few open routes and in some one-on-one coverages where he realized that he could have thrown him the ball and he would have caught it. I also think the same thing. I think it's been so long since he's had like a true number 1 type receiver where even if he's covered one-on-one, he doesn't have to be open. He can just kind of throw him the ball. So I think that's going to take an adjustment to, but definitely something. It'll come in clutch in some important situations later on, knowing that at some points they're going to have to play DeAndre Hopkins in single coverage and that he can just throw the ball up to him or throw a back shoulder and he'll be able to come up with the catch. So getting him integrated into the offense should be even more helpful. Statistically, Mahomes had a decent game. He did end up having another interception in this game, but the same as last game, it wasn't like an interception that was like his fault based on him throwing a bad pass. It was another one where the ball got tipped at the line of scrimmage, and then they were able to catch it off the tip. But the defense ultimately did look strong. I did think the Raiders played probably up to their potential based on their current roster. I don't think they could have played any better. And so for them, I guess they could say it's a moral victory that they ended up only losing by 7. But again, this was the game that I was right about in my pick 3. So the next game in my pick 3 was the Seattle Seahawks against the Buffalo Bills. Now I did pick Seattle as the upset. They were favored to lose by 3 points, and they got beat down pretty bad. They lost 31-10. It was actually probably the most shocking outcome out of all the games that I saw on Sunday. Now, it wasn't so shocking that they lost, especially considering that they were expected to lose, but how they lost was shocking to me. Again, a big thing, part of the reason why I thought that Seattle would pull off the upset was because of Buffalo's travel all the way across country. Usually that has an effect on a lot of teams. They were able to start from jump, basically executing their offense and stopping Seattle's offense. So Buffalo, I have to say, is actually looking better than I previously expected. I think Seattle's the first team that Buffalo's beaten this season that I'd actually consider like a really good team. So definitely they're moving up in the rankings. Keon Coleman has definitely stepped up and proven himself as a really good rookie receiver. I think Amari Cooper getting more into the mix is really elevating Josh Allen's play, and Buffalo, with especially with how horrible everybody else in their division is looking, Buffalo essentially has their division locked up, which means they have a playoff berth locked up, which means that the Bills will definitely be scary come playoff time later in the season. Now, for the last game in my pick three, I did pick the New York Jets to beat the New England Patriots. Unfortunately, they lost 25-22. This one was terrible. This is supposed to be the game that the Jets had on their schedule that they circled as, okay, we got an easy win finally. We got a team that we should be able to beat. Matter of fact, out of the 2 wins that they have in the season, this is one of those teams that they had previously beat. And to boot, they were able to knock out Drake May early in the game to where Jacoby Brissett had to play most of the game, yet they still lost. At this point, I think this kind of cemented the Jets season as far as where they actually are versus where we all assume they might be. Now, before the season, honestly, I picked the Jets to win their division. I felt like Aaron Rodgers was going to make a big enough difference over Zach Wilson that we would see a definitely improved record this year. Unfortunately, so far through this year, they are 2-6. Last year, through this point with Zach Wilson, they were 4-4. Now, granted, the defense isn't playing the same way that it was playing last year, but I don't feel like it's that big of a drop-off for it to be the defense's responsibility. Yes, the defense may have cost them in this game against New England by giving up that long drive at the end of the game to Jacoby Brissett and letting New England get a touchdown to win. But overall, the offense just hasn't really looked better than it did when Zach Wilson was there. So I have to put this solely on the feet of Aaron Rodgers. He was the one that pretty much put confidence in the Jets fans that he was going to make a difference. He got all of the weapons that he felt like he needed. Yet, not only is it not the same result, the result is worse. So, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's any way that the Jets can turn the season around, at least not from a perspective of what their expectations were. Even if they do get some wins together, I don't see them making it even to 500 based on how they've played. If they can't beat the Patriots, I don't see how they can beat anybody else on the rest of their roster. So even the games that people were like, oh, their schedule's not too tough, yeah, maybe not in comparison to some of the top teams, but comparison to who they've already lost to, yeah, it is pretty tough because everybody's tough compared to New England, basically. The only other win they have on their season is against Tennessee, who's also another terrible team. So definitely not looking good for the Jets. And Aaron Rodgers essentially is just going to have to eat some humble pie and at least improve to some degree. Now, after my pick three, we got to get into my lock of the week. Now, my lock of the week, I did win. I had the Detroit Lions beating the Tennessee Titans. Now, I mentioned in this pick for lock of the week that this was probably going to be the most lopsided win. It was probably the most horrible matchup between a top team and a bottom team, and not one of those games where it's like, well, maybe they're actually better than the bottom team is better than their record and the good team is not as good as their record. No, this was literally like top versus bottom, and it played out exactly as I expected, which is why it was my lock of the week. So I was right this week, 1-0 on the season for locks of the week. I'm now 4-3, so finally getting back to where it should be, considering a horrible start for my lock of the week. Detroit just pretty much dismantled Tennessee from the beginning. Obviously, in the very, very beginning of the game, it was close, but Detroit really kind of leaned on the fact that they're just better than Tennessee in every single aspect. Special teams had a huge day. They won by a final score of 52-14, and Jared Goff had like a mediocre game. I believe he threw for less than 100 yards or around 100 yards, which is kind of crazy to think that your quarterback can throw for around 100 yards and you score 52 points. That is a complete domination, meaning that you dominated in all three phases, and that the quarterback didn't really have to do anything. He just had to not mess it up. And that's exactly what happened. Tennessee gave as much as they could, but they just are no match for Detroit. Detroit is definitely one of the best teams in the league, and they proved it on Sunday. Now for the last game in my picks is the underdog pick of the week. Now, if you recall, my underdog pick of the week this week was the Dallas Cowboys to upset the San Francisco 49ers. They were favored to lose by 5.5 points. They ended up losing by 6, 30-24. I mean, it's not really that surprising. The only frustrating part about it for me in terms of my underdog pick of the week is I mentioned in my pick that it came down between the Cowboys and the Cardinals as the two teams I was trying to decide which one I was going to pick for my underdog pick of the week. And of course, the Cardinals actually won, so that would have worked for my underdog pick of the week. But I ended up going with Dallas, and they lost. So 0-1 this week for my underdog pick of the week brings me to 2-5 on the season for my underdog pick of the week. Obviously, it makes sense because these are going to be the hardest to get right, considering it has to be a team that's favored to lose by more than 3 points. So in the last 2 weeks, there was no team that was favored to lose by more than 3 points that won. This week it was the Cardinals, and that's who I should have went with, which I actually said was an option I was going between. But nonetheless, I picked the Cowboys, so I got to ride with that. They started off the game playing pretty decent. They didn't capitalize on a lot of opportunities that I felt like they needed to kind of really put their foot on the neck of the 49ers. Going into halftime, of course, the Cowboys were up 10-6, and then the third quarter, the 49ers just basically proved like, hey, we're way better than you, and you can't hang with us for the totality of the game. The Cowboys ended up getting down. I believe they gave up 3 scores in a row to San Francisco, and so then the lead got stretched out. And then, of course, in famous Dak fashion, when the game isn't tight and there's no more pressure on him, then he was able to lead a couple drives and make the game close, so to speak. But then when they actually had the ball with a chance to go ahead in the game, he reverted back to how he was in the third quarter and just couldn't execute. Now, I've heard a lot of people who are diagnosing the Cowboys offense saying that the play calling hasn't been great. The design of the plays is elementary. I don't know because I haven't been looking into coaches' tape that long. In terms of I haven't looked at their coaches' tape to really break down play by play. Obviously, when I'm watching the games, I'm watching their game and several others at the same time. But just from what I've seen, it mainly feels like there's just a lack of execution. I feel like players are dropping passes when they need to get the catch. Dak is missing throws when he absolutely has to have it. The offensive line is not very good, which is crazy because that was one of the things that we always came to expect from the Cowboys, is to have a great offensive line where the quarterback's always going to have time. And he does have a decent amount of time, but not as much as we're used to. They're definitely not opening up huge run holes because Dallas's run game is terrible. They moved Dalvin Cook up from the practice squad for this game, but he wasn't very effective. The number one rusher in this entire game was Brock Purdy, which is kind of crazy. Now, I think the biggest part of that was Jordan Mason got hurt during the game, but nonetheless, for Brock Purdy to lead all rushers in the game is pretty damning for the Dallas Cowboys, especially because he had like 54 yards rushing. So the fact that the Cowboys couldn't rush for more than 54 yards is pretty disgusting. And it's not looking good for them because their schedule does not get any easier going forward. All right, so now after my picks, we got to get into the question of the week. Now, for this question of the week, we're going to look into, we're 8 games into the season. We're almost halfway through the season, but not quite yet. This is a time where pretty much in every single season, there's at least one team that is currently below 500 that ends up making the playoffs. So, for this question of the week, I want you guys to tell me which one of these teams that is currently below 500 is actually going to make the playoffs. So, as per usual, my question of the week, I'm going to give you 5 options. Then I want you guys to comment and respond, and then we'll go over your guys' response in the next couple of episodes, and then I'll give you my response to the question of the week. So the question of the week again is, which team with a lower than 500 record is going to make the playoffs? Here are the 5 options that I'm going to give you, and I'll give you a little reason why I put them in this category as a team that might be able to make the playoffs. So to start, we're going to go with the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Miami Dolphins are currently 2-5, which obviously is a little daunting, but they did just get back Tua Tagovailoa, and as we've seen from this week's game, their offense finally started looking like the way we expected them to look. So yes, they're 3 games below 500, but with Tua getting back in the mix, their offense has started to click again. I would expect them to kind of pick it up even more going forward. So, and their division itself is not very strong. Yes, Buffalo is 3 games ahead of them, but if Miami can get it going, maybe they can challenge them. Maybe they can get into that wild card potential. The next option to choose from as a team under 500 that might make the playoffs is the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys are 3-4 right now, but they have made the playoffs pretty consistently. I think this is the first time through 8 weeks that they're actually 3rd in their division for probably a long time since I can remember. But they're not so far behind that it's impossible for them to still win the division. Right now, the Commanders are leading the division. I believe they're 6-2. So they're basically 3.5 games back of the Commanders. And then they're also behind the Philadelphia Eagles, which they do have several games against both of those teams. So they're definitely able to make it up if they can get it together. And like I said, the Cowboys do have a history of at least making the playoffs. So they're definitely an option as a team that could make the playoffs even though they're below 500 right now. The next team on my list is the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams are currently 3-4. Their division has been really tightly contested, but they just got back Cooper Kupp. They just got back Puka Nacua, and they showed what they could do with all of their firepower back together. Had a huge win this week against the Minnesota Vikings on Thursday Night Football. I think that definitely will get their momentum in the right direction, considering that there was trade talks, like as if they were going to essentially break the team apart. Maybe Stafford was going to get traded. Maybe Kupp was going to get traded. But after this win, it looks like they're keeping everything together. So they definitely are a team that has potential to make the playoffs, even though they're currently 3-4. The next option is the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals are 3-5 right now. Their division is also very tightly contested. They are in 3rd place in their division, but they do have Joe Burrow, who is still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And we've seen him start off the season pretty slow and then come back and lead his team to the playoffs. So they're definitely an option of a team that could still make the playoffs. And the last option of teams that are below 500 that could make the playoffs is another team in that same division, the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns right now are also 2-5, but with Deshaun Watson being out and Jameis Winston coming in and leading them to a huge victory over the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens were a team that was previously ranked in my top 5. There were sportscasters out there who were claiming that the Baltimore Ravens were even the best team in the league. I never said that, but hey, that's who Cleveland beat with Jameis Winston in his first start as a Cleveland Brown. So if they're able to beat the Ravens, are they able to beat some other top-tier teams? Could they get on a roll? I don't know. We'll see. So they definitely deserve to be in this conversation as a team who's currently below 500 who could potentially make the playoffs. So I want you guys to tell me which one of these teams is going to make the playoffs. Again, your 5 options are the Miami Dolphins, the Dallas Cowboys, the Los Angeles Rams, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cleveland Browns. All right, now to finish this episode, we got to get into my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 8. So to start, at number 1, obviously we got to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're the only undefeated team left in the league, and every week they seem to be getting it going a little more and a little more. They just had a huge trade yesterday. They got Uche from the New England Patriots for a 2026 6th round pick, which is basically nothing, especially because listening to Bill Belichick on the Pat McAfee show yesterday, they said that even if they don't re-sign Uche after the season, they'll end up with a compensatory pick, which is likely going to be a 6th round pick in that same year that they lost for getting Uche. So essentially they got him for free. The Chiefs have looked like the most complete team in terms of getting wins no matter what. Regardless of injury concerns, regardless of maybe an offense not clicking on all cylinders, maybe special teams making blunders, maybe the defense slipping up from here and there. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they get wins. Now, they do have a really tough part of their schedule coming up, but they've already beaten some really good teams, so we'll see how it is going forward. But they definitely deserve to be in the number 1 spot right now. At number 2, we have the Detroit Lions. They're the only team in the league with only 1 loss. They definitely look like the most talented team from top to bottom in terms of special teams, offense, and defense. Every aspect of their team has great players. Yes, they do have a crucial injury to their defensive line with Aiden Hutchinson being out, but they are so complete that loss hasn't really affected them yet, and it may not affect them going forward. They're definitely the best team in the NFC by far, so they deserve to be in that number 2 spot. At number 3, and this team might surprise some people, I'm going with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, yes, the Minnesota Vikings are on a 2-game losing streak, but for one of their losses was to the Detroit Lions, who I just mentioned are the best team in the NFC and the number 2 overall team. The other loss was this week to the LA Rams, who are finally back at full strength. I think that the Rams are actually a lot better than their record. And if you look at the teams that the Vikings have beaten, the other teams that you might consider putting in this 3rd spot, they've beaten them already. Matter of fact, the next 2 teams that I'm going to mention in my top 5, the Vikings have beaten already, and they've beaten them soundly. Even the team that's number 4, the final score of the game was close. The game wasn't really that close. I watched the game from start to finish. The Vikings dominated that game, and then in garbage time, as they kind of eased up, that team made it close. But I would still say, since they beat them handily, they deserve to be above them. And so right now, I have the Vikings at number 3. Now, coming in at number 4 is one of those teams that I said they beat. It's the Green Bay Packers. The Packers have definitely got it rolling recently. They were able to get another win this week against the Jaguars. Now, the game against the Jags wasn't very impressive. I think they looked a lot better the previous week, but nonetheless, they got a win. Last-second field goal, which is, at the end of the day, if you win, you win. It doesn't really matter. The one concern is that Jordan Love seems to be injured again. There's speculation that he may not play this week because they have a bye in the following week. So they'll go back to Malik Willis. Malik Willis did get them some wins when he played earlier, so we'll see how that goes. But right now, Green Bay deserves to be in that number 4 spot. And at the number 5 spot, we got to go with the Houston Texans. Houston Texans are another team that got demolished by the Vikings previously, which is why the Vikings are where they are. But Houston deserves it to be in this 5 spot. Off the top of my head, before really digging into it, I thought I was going to put Buffalo in this spot, but then I remember that Houston did beat Buffalo on the field. So for now, Houston deserves to be in this 5 spot. I believe they are currently 5-2. They, even with having Collins out, they have still been able to keep it going. Tank Dell was able to be productive this week, unlike last week. It did look like they might have a significant injury to Stephon Diggs. We haven't got more information about it yet, but we'll see how that is going forward. But for now, Houston deserves to be in the 5 spot in the top 5. Now for the worst 5. At number 28, we got to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags did play a decent game. They almost put themselves in position to get a win against the Green Bay Packers, but ultimately they didn't get the win. And so far on their season, their wins are against terrible teams. So until that changes, they definitely deserve to be in this bottom 5. But right now, they'll stay at 28. At 29, we have the New England Patriots. Now the Patriots got a huge win this week against their division rival, the Jets. Ultimately, I don't think that there's anything that they should look forward to in terms of thinking, oh, they can make a playoff push or anything like that. I honestly think they're better off, I don't want to say tanking, but hoping that they have a terrible record so they can get a higher pick. I believe the Jets still have the tiebreaker on them because of the Jets' win earlier in the season. So even though they did get the win, it didn't hurt their draft stock as much as you would think it did. But again, New England is another team that hasn't really beaten a really good team yet. So they deserve to be in that 29 spot. At number 30, we got to go with the team they did beat, the New York Jets. For the longest time, I've been making excuses for the Jets' record and expecting them to get it together, but it is what it is. Their record is what it is. They're 2-6, I believe. So they deserve to be here. They did just lose to New England, so they're going to have to go below New England for right now. I don't see them getting it turned around, so they deserve to be in the 30 spot. At 31, we got to go with the Tennessee Titans. Again, even though Mason Rudolph has given them better quarterback play than Will Levis, overall, they don't look very good. They got destroyed by Detroit. Now, I do think that Tennessee will probably be able to get some other wins later on in the season, just because I do like their defense. Even though the defense gave up a lot of points ultimately, they did do a good job in terms of holding Detroit's yardage output, but Detroit just beat them up everywhere else, so they deserve to be at 31. But at least they're not the worst team in the league. At 32, we definitely have to stay with the Carolina Panthers. They actually started off winning this game. Their opening drive, they did score, and then they didn't score again until the very end of the game. So another game where they get blown out, which will increasingly add to their point differential. That's the worst in the league by far. Nothing's looking good for them. They're essentially, I think, going to earn the number 1 pick for the 3rd year in a row. Obviously, they didn't pick number 1 each year because they traded the first pick 2 years ago. But they're definitely going to earn that spot again, if you ask me. So they deserve to be in the 32 spot as the worst team in the NFL after week number 8. So that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.